Welcome to Thriving Beyond MST. Thank you for tuning in to episode 3. This is Uncovering the Cost of Silence. What happens when MST goes unspoken? I am your host, Dalia, an Air Force and Army veteran, a survivor, and someone still learning how to thrive fully beyond trauma. And I want to begin today with a truth that's hard to say out loud. MST doesn't just happen in silence. It survives because of silence. Today is April 1st, the first day of Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And I need to be honest with you, this episode wasn't easy to put together. I had to take several breaks, deep breaths, and maybe wipe a few tears in the process because it was that impactful. So I hope that you will enjoy it. Because what I'm about to share, it's not just research, it's not theory, it's my life. And in some ways, the life of countless other service members and veterans. Now, I know what it's like to live with severe PTSD, insomnia, nightmares, hypervigilance, flinching at a sudden movement, sound, or touch, suicidal ideation, a suicidal attempt, and being unable to trust myself, even with those that are closest to me. I know what it's like to walk away from a military career I once loved and that I was good at, that I was genuinely good at and passionate about. Not because I didn't want to serve, but because everything surrounding my MST experience and all those years of carrying this trauma made it impossible for me to stay. And I'll share a little bit more too on the other things that came with that because it wasn't just MST, it was other things that made it really difficult for me to stay. And I know the pain that MST inflicts on the people around you. I know it because my father carries a weight that no parent should carry, that he couldn't protect me. My mother has said, I wish I could have held you when it all happened. I wish I could have been there. My brothers were too young to understand back then, but they understand now. And I know they wish that there was something they could have done. You know, every once in a while, one or both of them will call me just to check in on me. Like they're my older brothers, when in reality, I'm the older sister. But they check in on me just to see how I'm doing, how things are going, and I can sense their genuine concern. And, you know, it's something that it stays with you because you realize that how much it has impacted them as well. And that's the cost of silence I want to talk about today. This April hits different for me, honestly, because it's my first April since 2007 outside of the military. I separated last year, and so this is the first time that this Sexual Assault Awareness Month has that I have more time to think about what it means to me personally, and what it means in the context of this podcast as well. And creating this podcast during this month in particular, it's not just meaningful, it's also personal. For years, April meant things that it means to everybody else. Spring, Easter, school finals, in uniform, those annual Sexual Assault Awareness Month observance events and trainings, those that I always showed up to with care. But I never shared why they mattered so much to me. And to me in my mind, the fewer people who knew, the better. Or so I thought that was the best approach. That shifted when Sexual Assault Awareness Month stopped being about awareness and started becoming about reclaiming my voice. It didn't happen in uniform, as I stated before. It happened after I left. The best way that I can explain it is this. It was like coming up for air after holding my breath underwater for years. My body was screaming to breathe, to process what it had endured. But I was paralyzed, frozen in survival mode. Even after therapy, even after I knew the words to say, leaving the military hurt on so many different levels, but it was necessary. I didn't realize how tightly I'd been holding everything in. There was so many emotions, so many thoughts. There was so much that my body could not release because for so long I'd forgotten how to exhale. I'd forgotten what that sigh of relief felt like. The trauma was like a ball and chain I've carried for nearly 2 decades. It was weighing me down and weighing me down in areas where I didn't immediately recognize it. And once I stopped moving at the speed of military life, everything caught up to me. Everything just like poured on top of me. All the emotions, everything that I had suppressed rose to the surface all at once. I'm talking about rage, sorrow, shame, confusion, anger, a lot of anger, a lot of confusion. And even though it was overwhelming, it was also a sort of beginning, a sort of crossover. This episode is not easy, but it's necessary because silence has cost me and so many others far, far more than people will ever know, than more than they will ever understand. And today we're going to talk about it, all of it. Let's start with the place this silence hits first, inside. For so long, I felt like I had to be strong for me and for everyone around me, my family, my friends, my coworkers, people that looked up to me, people I looked up to. I just felt that I had to hold it all together. I had to ground myself. I had to be the one who kept it together. I couldn't let it show that that I was unraveling. Because I learned early on, especially when the rape happened, that no one was coming to save me, that I was on my own. And this is how I operated all the time, nonstop. There wasn't a stop button. There wasn't a pause button. There wasn't a reset button. It was a constant operating on this survival mode. But silence comes at a price. It isolates you. It makes you question so many things. It makes you question your reality. And it teaches you that your pain doesn't matter. That's what silence does. That's in many ways, although I don't like to admit it, in many ways how it made me feel. So here's what silence can look like on the inside. The PTSD symptoms, as I mentioned before, insomnia, nightmares, hypervigilance, flinching at everything, suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts, substance abuse. I experienced so many of these all at once. Shame that turns inward and becomes your identity. Losing trust in your own intuition and the way that you make decisions and the way that you process things and the things that you say. Surviving in a body that always feels so unsafe, so broken, so tired, so depleted. And forgetting what rest, laughter, and safety even feel like. That's difficult. It's putting it into words and actually experiencing that is two very separate, different things. And what hurts the most is that none of this happens in a vacuum. Survivors often look fine on the outside. They're high performers, they're sharp, and they work well under pressure because we're so used to hiding the truth just to function. We're so used to working under pressure because that's our normal, that's our baseline, that's how we are conditioned. For me, living with PTSD was being in a state of constant alert. I counted the number of people in every room I entered. I always had at least 2 exit plans. Everywhere, with everyone, even the people who loved me, even the people that I should have felt safe with, but I didn't. I never felt safe. Walking outside meant scanning behind me obsessively, passing an alley or a dumpster, a concrete block. I'd have to check for shadows, for shapes, for threats. I had to check constantly over my shoulder to see who was walking behind me, especially if I heard footsteps. I couldn't make myself just continue walking like a normal person would do. I had to stop and move to the side and let them pass. And it was like a reflex. I was always watching, always measuring risk, even when nothing was wrong. There was absolutely nothing wrong. And my nervous system was screaming that it might be, that something might be behind me, that something might be there. And then came the fear of being seen. Something so normal, yet it caused so much fear. I didn't want to smile too much. I didn't want to look too friendly, too approachable, or too pretty, or too anything. I especially hated being called pretty. It just annoyed me. I couldn't stand it. And that's something that I have slowly started to be able to accept, because being noticed meant being targeted. That's how my mind processed it. That's how I operated. That was my everyday. So I hid in plain sight. And even that hiding was exhausting. And when I finally did fall asleep, when I could get some sleep, there was the fear that followed me there too. The nightmares, replays of the event happening, shadows that never left. I had this unhealthy relationship with sleep. I was afraid to close my eyes because I knew what I would see. I knew what would happen. I knew that I would wake up in the middle of the night screaming because I just felt this was happening again. Looking back, speaking this out loud now, I'm starting to realize how torturous it was just to exist, just to live day by day, to walk, to rest, to breathe. I didn't feel safe anywhere or with anyone, not even in hospitals, especially not there, because my attacker had also been in the medical field. So every hospital I worked in, every ER I walked through, every single time I had to be a patient, there was this voice in my head, in me, that was asking, what if he's there? What if he walked by me in a hallway? What if I had to take care of him if he was my patient? What if he was the one taking care of me? I can't tell you how frightening that was. And this was something that I thought about consistently every single time that I had to go to work. I wasn't safe anywhere. For me, the silence felt a lot of times safer than the risk of being dismissed or blamed. And so this was part of the reason why I didn't report the rape. But that silence came, as you can see, it came at a cost of connection, joy, and even just basic peace of mind. It cost me a lot. When survivors are silenced in the military, the consequences don't end with us. They have this ripple outward effect throughout the force. We lose good people, strong, capable, committed leaders, because they can't survive a culture that refuses to protect them. Why would they? Why? I was one of them. I was one of them that I just refused to be somewhere where I didn't feel safe anymore, where I didn't feel heard or seen. Here's what MST is costing the military, whether they admit it or not. Perpetrators retained while survivors are medically discharged, and that's very unfair. Unit cohesion, that's eroded a lot of times. Leaders walk away early, not because they want to, but because they can't unsee what's happening, and they can't do very much to stop it from continuing to happen. Bystanders that suffer moral injury, they carry guilt, shame, and silence. Distrust creeps into the chain of command, and it's not easy to rebuild once it's gone. I've seen it too many times and experienced it as well. Readiness drops and talent is lost. And the military's credibility in the eyes of the public, it slips every time survivors are dismissed, discharged, or disbelieved, or blamed. And when someone experiences MST, and whether they report it or not, and they see no justice, it doesn't just damage their trust, it breaks faith in the entire mission and the entire force. And this is something that I have seen as well. I once joked that the military was the most stable relationship I've ever had. And honestly, it wasn't really a joke. Because in the middle of all the pain and uncertainty, there were so many beautiful experiences that I would not have had otherwise. I gained skills that shaped how I move through the world. Quick assessment, calm in chaos, confidence to lead. And the places I got to see, just some of those will forever stay with me. In Europe, South Asia, 15 countries outside of the Americas. Those weren't just destinations or, just a quick trip, or they became part of my perspective. They're part of who I am now. And let's just say that spaghetti, pizza, gelato, schnitzel, German beer, those are completely ruined for me because they taste so good overseas. And anything that I find here in the States does not compare. But what I'm most proud of is the people, the humans I served with. And it's some of the best fucking people I've ever known. And I say that with all sincerity. There's still some that I talk to. There's still that camaraderie, check-ins, still support. I know I'll have some of those bonds for life because once you establish those bonds, those are hard to break. And I'm so grateful for that. But knowing I had the potential to be a great leader and I had to walk away from that, that was perhaps the hardest reality to accept. I wanted to be that leader. I wanted to be the one that people said, this person makes people feel seen. They're not afraid to get their hands dirty. This is the one who makes space for others to rise. Because I was doing that even in my low capacity that I had as, a captain. I was doing that for others, and it felt so good to be able to do that for others. And so it was really something that I wanted to continue doing. But in order to give myself the space that I needed to truly heal, I had to make one of the most difficult decisions of my life: to separate from the military, from that stable relationship that I've had for so many years. And my heart was torn. My mind wrestled to make sense of it, and my soul was uneasy. Even though it knew without a shadow of a doubt that it was the right call, that it was the necessary call. It was still not an easy thing to do. I had to adjust fire one last time. In the military, we say we're a team, a family. But if we can't protect our own, we can't lead. And that's a cost the military still has trouble seeing and acting on, from my personal experience. MST doesn't just change the survivor. It changes the people who love us. And this is the part that hurts the most. Because MST hurts survivors, hurts people, family members, loved ones, friends. It breaks something in all of us. My family couldn't stop it. They couldn't fix it. But they've carried it with me. My father's guilt, my mother's grief, my brother's quiet anger and anguish. It changes a lot of dynamics. It changes holidays. It changes hugs, communication. It changes how love feels. And the cost doesn't stop with a survivor. Partners, children, and parents experience that secondary trauma that I talk about in my own family. Trust breaks down, communication becomes strained, intimacy becomes difficult. Families often feel helpless or ashamed, or both. Angry that they don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to understand. All of those emotions ripple. The isolation, avoidance. A lot of times we blame ourselves for bringing pain to the people we love. Even though we're hurting inside, we're dealing with this big pain. We still blame ourselves for sharing this with our family members and with our loved ones because we know that our pain is going to cause them pain. In my personal experience, this part is one of the biggest blind spots in care. Most providers never considered how MST affects not just the survivor, but the entire family system. At least in my experience, many of the providers that I saw were never concerned with, hey, how's your family handling this? How is this impacting the way you communicate with your family, the way you interact with them? That was very rarely a topic of conversation. I was trying to process trauma that lived in every cell of my body, and at the same time, trying to navigate a family that didn't know how to help me. didn't know the right questions to ask. It was like we were all underwater, but in different oceans, and no one had an idea how to reach each other. We were just lost. We were all lost. We were all hurting, and we didn't know how to communicate this, how to make it better. The military, they usually focus on the surface level stuff, what they could see, what was immediate. Their approach felt one-dimensional, like they couldn't wrap their minds around the full picture. And after a while, I stopped trying to explain it. I stopped trying to tell them how it was impacting my family, how I needed more help that was comprehensive, that included my family, because they were also hurting. I didn't want to add to my family's confusion a lot of times, so I stayed quiet. And honestly, that quiet has always made me feel more alone. Only recently did I start having real conversations with my family, and I learned how they had been dealing with this, how they had been hurting and carrying this with them as well. And it's hard. It's hard to know that my father carries this guilt that he couldn't protect me. It's hard to know that my mother grieves for what happened to me almost as if it had happened to her. And my brothers, they carry that delayed rage, that helplessness. And I can tell a lot of times they're trying to make sense of this, or trying to make sense of why I behave or a certain way, why I don't talk very much about certain things. And it's difficult for them to understand sometimes, but it's also difficult for me to explain it. These are the things that stay with me, you know? And here's the truth. I'm so fucking lucky. I have a family unit that is close, loving, and loyal. I couldn't ask for a better family. And even then, we struggled. So I can't even begin to imagine what it's like for those who face this without a support system, or who endure it overseas or while they were deployed thousands of miles away from anyone who knows their heart, from anyone who can offer comfort or a shoulder to cry on or something. I can't imagine what that's like. This part is still hard for me to talk about because it changes how love feels for everyone, not just for me, but for my family as well. It makes you question whether you're worthy of being loved fully, gently, without fear, without reservation. And these are doubts that are constantly living in my mind, and I have to challenge them every day. Now let's talk about the hidden costs, the ones that don't make headlines necessarily, but they break people silently all the same. Here's what doesn't show up in official reports, but it's still very real, and it still impacts so many people. Careers that are derailed, survivors that have to walk away just to protect themselves, just to take care of themselves and to be able to process this trauma like I had to. Avoiding promotions because visibility means risk. Bystanders who saw and stayed silent, now carrying a guilt, a VA system and TRICARE as well that still can't hold complex trauma. Not well, not consistently. I mean, I've seen so many gaps in this in the years that I have had to go through the VA system and through TRICARE to get therapy. And rising rates of homelessness, substance use, PTSD symptoms, suicidal ideation, and attempts among MST survivors because the system fails and survivors are blamed for breaking. And that's so unfair. The truth is that our current system, it still isn't built for the healing, the type of healing that we need. Providers aren't trained well. There's a lot of inconsistency and not a lot of continuity of care. Not a lot of them understand the complexity of this trauma. And they still, again, see things as one layer or one dimension. And they think that, well, we're going to address this one thing or this one trauma without addressing the other things. And hopefully that one thing goes away. And it just doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Leaders aren't held accountable a lot of times, although this may be getting better a little bit. But trauma from MST is treated a lot of times like a broken arm, or that's how it's referenced. That's how it's been referenced to me. Someone saying, oh, well, it's like a broken arm. You just give it time to heal and time will heal it. But that's complete bullshit. And there have been several times where I have walked out of therapy and not returned because of things like this that are inaccurate and that completely fail to understand other perspectives and to understand military sexual trauma as something that is far more complex than a broken bone. I've seen it, I've lived it, and I'm not the only one. I've talked to several other MST survivors who share the same types of stories, the same types of experiences with therapists, with therapy groups. The same barriers that I faced in 2007, they're still here in 2020, in 2025. Why has this not changed? Why are the same obstacles still being presented to people after so many years? The process has not improved very much. A few years ago, I was still on active duty, working as a nursing supervisor in a military hospital overseas. And I remember being in this meeting. I stood in front of leadership, speaking clearly and as respectfully as I could, trying to point out that there was something in our process that was broken, that wasn't the most conducive or helpful for military sexual trauma survivors. And I was shut down. Not because I was wrong, but because they'd already decided that they were right, that the decision that they had made was the right decision, even though they had not really considered anything else. And that wasn't the first time, unfortunately. At a different military hospital, also overseas, there was this officer who had been sexually harassing young women in the unit that he was in charge of. And instead of being removed completely from the hospital or from even that section, that wing of the hospital, he was transferred just across the hall. And where did they put him? They put him in charge of the ICU, where I was working as a nurse, and where some of the very same women that he had sexually harassed were working just a few feet away. And no surprise, he didn't stop. He kept harassing staff now on the ICU. But instead of being held accountable, instead of being punished, he was promoted and allowed to retire as a lieutenant colonel. Watching leadership allow this to happen again and again made me lose trust and respect. And honestly, I felt disgusted. I felt disgusted that it was the same leaders who I had looked up to, who I had confided in, who I respected, that allowed this to happen under their leadership. Staying in the military began to feel like I was part of the problem instead of being part of the solution. And I remember feeling like I had to overcompensate because I felt so deeply that I was contributing to the problem, because nothing that I was doing, as much as I was trying, was making a difference. And I didn't stop caring, but because I could no longer pretend that the system worked, I couldn't be there anymore. When we say support the troops, this is what that should mean. Not just parades, flags, and fireworks, or a free meal from Denny's or Cracker Barrel, but protecting our most vulnerable. What do we lose when we silence survivors? We lose future commanders, future mentors, future healers, people who could have changed everything, something, if the system hadn't broken them first. That's a very difficult reality to accept, because as I'm saying this, I can see people in my mind who I feel like, man, this person could have been such a great leader, but they couldn't be in a system, in an organization that allowed things like this to happen, either to them personally or to people that they knew. This podcast wasn't born from a place of comfort, as you can see. It was born out of necessity. I started it because I no longer wanted to carry the silence alone. And I knew that others didn't want to either. Sexual Assault Awareness Month is not just a campaign. It's a sacred space to remember, to reclaim, to reimagine. I see this podcast as sort of a vessel, if you will, for my voice, yes, but also for yours. Because healing doesn't come from silence. It comes from speaking up, from being believed, from unlearning things like shame, isolation, and all the other terrible things that come with that. And it's a long list. I want you to know that there is power in reclaiming your voice, even if it seems very intimidating at first, because it is, right? I didn't just one day wake up and decide I'm going to put all of what has happened to me out on the internet for people to hear and for people to, pick apart. It's not easy to get in front of a microphone and say, I'm going to put my story, my account of something that's so personal that has happened to me, and I'm just going to let strangers listen in, and it's not easy. But community itself is resistance. Sexual Assault Awareness Month is not just for optics, or it shouldn't be. It should be for truth. Healing begins where silence ends. And as much as I had a difficult time, again, with processing and being able to put this out in a podcast form for others to hear, I think that now I've become a little bit more comfortable with people knowing that side of me. This platform is for survivors, allies, and to create reform, Again, honestly, when I first started this podcast, I didn't expect that much would come from it. I didn't expect that many people would listen, that there would be many downloads. Um, and I definitely had my share of setbacks. Not too long ago, I had to rebrand, I had to re record from scratch. And for a while, I really wasn't sure I had it in me to rebuild. I doubted. I was tired. But then I reminded myself this process, it's a lot like healing. Sometimes things fall apart, shit hits the fan, chaos ensues. Sometimes we hit roadblocks. Sometimes we continue to hit roadblocks. And oftentimes we hurt more before we get better. But we always have a choice to stay down or to get back up, dust ourselves off, and try again, like Aaliyah said. For those of you who remember Aaliyah, the R&B singer, yeah. This podcast became my way of choosing myself, of standing back up, of reclaiming the things that MST tried to steal. My confidence, my identity, my voice. And what surprised me the most and what has been the most rewarding has been the connections it's created. Because I've shared this idea of this podcast with friends that I went to high school with professors at school, with complete strangers. And I've forged stronger bonds with my family. I've gotten so much support from mentors, friendships with people like Patty, Colin, and Eric, and Mo, who've stood beside me without hesitation. And even strangers, people who've seen me wearing my Thriving Beyond MS t-shirt as I'm running through Fort Sam, and they've offered a kind word, a gentle nod, or one of those Texans, go get it, girl. This podcast isn't just about raising awareness. Yes, that's a very important piece of it, but it's not just that. We're here to build something better and bigger together. Even with everything MST has cost me, and it's cost me a lot, I'm still here. I'm still fighting. Some days it's easier, some days it's definitely harder. But this movement is growing. Maybe not growing super fast. Maybe it's growing one person at a time, or one person a day, or sometimes one person a month. But I want to leave you with some good news. I'm honored to share that this July I'll be presenting at the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault Seeds of Change Conference in Denton, Texas. My presentation is called Seeds of Solidarity, Empowering Voices with the Thriving Beyond MST podcast. Because that's what we're doing here. That's why I'm here, and I hope that that's why you're here too. To plant seeds of healing, of justice, of change. This podcast is about what we're building together. A movement where our pain has purpose. A platform where silence becomes strategy, and a space where healing isn't just a luxury, it's a right for everyone. And before we close, I want to share a little about what's coming up next on Thriving Beyond MST. I'll be sitting down with someone that I deeply respect, who spent years on the front lines supporting MST survivors. Her experience is real, her voice is grounded in facts, and her insights will change how we think about justice, prevention, and healing. And so I'm deeply honored to know this person, to have her as a friend, and to be bringing her on as my first guest on the podcast. That episode is going to drop later this month, So make sure to subscribe and share this series with someone who needs to hear it. Because Sexual Assault Awareness Month isn't just a calendar observation or an event. It's a call to consciousness. If any part of this episode resonated with you or moved you, please be sure to share it with someone you trust, with someone who needs to understand, with someone who has the power to help change this system. And let's be real, we all have a little bit of power, right? And if you're listening and you're a survivor, this is for you. We see you, we honor you, and we will not stop fighting until there are no more stories like yours. Please follow, subscribe, and leave an awesome review. Thank you. Until next time.